Greetings, I am AMartin, a fourth year history major and pre-law minor from Atlanta, Georgia. I chose chapters 2, 3, and 4 to speak about specifically because I felt like these were some of the, I feel like, most interesting chapters of the book. I believe that they had topics that I feel like we can still relate to today. Things and ideals that are still important and that we can still relate to, but also things that I found I was able to personally relate to. Specifically, that of chapter 2, it heavily touched on the topic of colorism, and being that I'm a darker skinned black woman, that's something I've experienced all my life. So, seeing the connection between how colorism looks and exists today versus how it looked back then, I was kind of able to make a connection to that. And just to see the elevation and how differently it looks today, and see, like, from a different perspective how it started off, I found that very interesting. And then also, I'm specifically just going to relate to chapter 3. Something that really stood out to me was these people that were chosen to be queens and kings of their universities, that in a time of civil unrest, in a time when there was a battle for civil rights, and they were in the forefront and they had these positions to speak out on these issues, how either they were afraid to do so because of what somebody else would say or how that would look, or even their parents' energy towards them being involved in the movement, discouraging it, the potential of them losing their position by being involved in the movement. And it's very unfortunate that some of those same issues that were happening back then, and some of those same barriers that were placed by their schools, their families, their peers, or their own personal fears, are still lingering within the pageantry of our universities, specifically that of HBCUs today. A little background about the author of this book. The book is written by author Kimberly Brown Pelham, and she is an author who received a history degree from Howard University. She specializes in the history of women's images, specifically that of the South, the culture of the South, and the struggle of Black freedom. So that could be things within the civil rights movement. She's worked at the National Park Service, Rosa Parks Museum, the Smithsonian. Like, her work is accessible at all of these locations. She's actually a faculty member for FAMU, and well, at this time she was a faculty member of FAMU, and just some of her work has just really shaped, I feel like, our education at FAMU. And just seeing her work, the contributions that she's made, we've just really been able to learn a lot with her tying history into FAMU. Something that she specifically did is relating these history and historical events, things within the civil rights movement, to FAMU and FAMU students. And I think just having that knowledge and having that relation to somebody that actually attended your school, she kind of opened a window for Florida agricultural mechanical students to see how big of an impact they can have on Tallahassee, because there were people that were literally sitting in those exact same seats that they were currently in, doing those same things. The content of this book ties within themes that we discussed during the course, because I feel like a lot of these things were intertwined. So some of the things that we talked about was femininity, and a big discussion within this book was pageantry. And I feel like pageantry is just another expression of femininity. It's a way to express being beautiful, of course, the dresses, the gowns, showing who you are, showing your talent, showing your abilities, what you contribute to the world, what makes you special, what makes you different, like what makes you a queen. And I think it analyzed it in a little bit of a different way, in how we understood it and how we discussed it in class. But being that there are some similarities between how femininity is produced in pageantry and how it's produced in daily life, or in this case of our class, how it's just been produced throughout the years, throughout the decades, and even centuries, we were kind of able to make that connection. Also, we also touched on queens or people in queen or pageantry figures. I know we had a former pageant winner speak to our class, and we kind of roughly went into the history of Miss America and just talked about that experience and how that looks, with simple things about being black. So things that make us beautiful as black women, things like our hair, and how just issues such as that, wearing your natural hair was an issue for women that were in positions such as Miss America or Miss Florida, Miss anything that could go for any state, and just being your own natural self, and how that could raise concern or issues. And we kind of saw a relation to that within the book, in a slightly different way, but basically these queens being involved in their communities and speaking out and being in positions to where they're using their platform to spread the word about things that their community is going through. And we kind of, see that connection there. For the 3 chapters, specific things that I wanted to touch on. For chapter 2, just the significance on how colorism impacted the black community, because not only during this area of Jim Crow, we're dealing with racism from white people, but we were also dealing with internalized racism for each other. Something that really stood out to me was how in Washington, D.C., you had Dunbar High School, and in the book it stated that it was catered to lighter skinned African Americans, and they were provided with quality learning, versus another school in the area that was called Armstrong High School that focused on more so trade skills. So, I mean, even within our own communities, we were creating that division. And just this chapter touching on that, that was just very interesting, because not only is it in our interactions as people, but it is engraved into our brains, the places where we learn. That was literally the ground, the starting point for where some of these colorist phenomenons kind of begin in this time period. For chapter 3, I spoke on this a little bit earlier, but something specifically that stood out to me was just the queens, their reluctance to participating in the civil rights movement, and that could have been their own personal reluctance or just reluctance from their families. I believe this is significant because I feel like this kind of goes hand in hand with things that are going on today, and people that are in positions to speak on issues that are negatively impacting the African American community, but they are scared to do so, or they're being told not to do so, recommended not to do so because of the position that they hold. I think that's important because that's something that we still see to this day. Even in Tallahassee, seeing instances of police brutality, still seeing issues of racism, still seeing things that are negatively not just impacting students, but specifically impacting black students in Tallahassee. Even something as small as a difference between when you're on FAMU side of Tallahassee, the south side, or when you're on Florida State side, there's just a complete difference there. And that's something that is talked about, but people that are in high positions, such as the presidents of these universities, the kings, the queens of these universities, they shy away from talking about these things, and they're facing situations such as being stripped of their crowns or being stripped of their leadership position if they were to speak on these things. So it just really hit home, because these are still things that we're struggling with and that we're seeing today. And then with chapter 4, that kind of talked about the emergence of like pageants, specifically the Miss Black America pageant during like the Black Power era. And something that I found to be really interesting was in Philadelphia, there was the political beauty and talent pageant. I believe this chapter, but specifically this pageant that was mentioned, is extremely significant because, beauty pageants emerging during this time period was its own thing. But to tie a pageant with being in a position, I guess, of being some sort of an activist or a spokesperson in your community, being that those type of actions were previously something that was shied away from, that being able to be tied with being in a pageantry position. I believe that was something that was extremely beautiful, and just a start of how you don't have to conform yourself, or you don't have to be quiet, or you don't necessarily have to just sit in your position, or you can't be active when things are going on with your community just because you are holding a position. I believe this material is significant until is significant to my learning experience, because it really led me to think about everything we learn, to think about beauty, to think about the Black experience on a deeper level. Specifically with these chapters, some things that I mentioned, like, yes, we were dealing with Jim Crow, but we had our own issues within our community. So not only did we receive discrimination from the outside, but we were discriminating against each other. And it was in systems that sometimes us as students, we couldn't even control, like within the school system. It was kind of programmed into our brains to have that separation, and we're seeing those long lasting effects. So I think just knowing and being able to learn how deeply rooted these issues are can, in a way, help us figure out how to alter them today, or how to pinpoint these issues, or how to pinpoint the lasting effects, how to pinpoint things that are still looking similar to that today, so we can call them out, so we'll be able to speak on them, so we would know how to go about these situations, because we've seen them grow and alter from how they were during the time period that's mentioned in this book until now. Specifically, I'm going to say for chapter 4, I think that was some of the newest information to me. And to me, that it affected my learning experience, not even necessarily on a scholarly level, but being that I'm heavily involved in NAACP, being able to see that tie within pageantry and politics, because a lot of times the two are separated, especially when there are matters as taboo as civil rights, specifically that to the rights of Black people, the rights of women, things of that nature. So seeing that there have been attempts to bridge that gap, and knowing that those avenues are possible, we just have to be willing to take them. We have to have people that are willing to take that step to combine the two. I think that's the only way that we're going to see the growth of people that are in these high positions, using their positions, using their opportunities, using their platforms, using their voices to speak about issues that are largely impacting their communities, instead of sitting in these positions and kind of operating and acting as if everything is okay and everything is normal, and not really highlighting things that they could reach an entire audience that may not even know this information if they were just able to speak about it and use their platforms to do so. So I think it was just really an opportunity for me to understand that the two don't have to be separated, even though that's how it's been for decades, that's how it's been for centuries, that's how people operate in these positions. But seeing that there is a way, there is a possibility, and there has been attempts to bridge those gaps. And I think if we just continue to push for that, and we bring that same energy going forward, I think that we were able to definitely be able to grow more